For the sake of this class, we're going to focus on 12 basic compositions that you can use as a floorboard or a template for your abstract painting to make it work. I used to work at Opus, and there was a wonderful woman there. She still works there, Sarah Clement, and she's an illustrator, and I commissioned her to make these for us. I hope you're as thrilled as I am. They're beautiful compositions, and they are in black and white intentionally because you're focusing on composition, not on color, nothing else. The first one that we have is cruciform. And basically what you see there is a cross shape. And what I really like about what Sarah's given you here is she's given you the composition with sort of a loose, inky feel, but also with tight lines. Now, as you are already becoming advanced painters, believe it or not, you're learning a lot of techniques in a short amount of time. You're learning what we did today when we were like doing it on the thick paint and also with the glazing is you're starting to add marks to your work. And so when you're more aware of composition, you can start to add the marks in a more meaningful way. So maybe you chose the cruciform and you're going to add some lines and use some tape or a ruler, and you're going to use a removal technique, or you're going to scrape into a glaze, keeping this composition in mind. So this is sort of creating that groundwork for you so that you can start creating a painting that actually really works. So as you do these really neat markings that you've seen today, this is something to consider. So the cruciform is the first one, and it's a shape of a cross, but it could be slanted, or it could just be the, like some people draw a full-on cross on their painting, but it could just be a few scratches and marks that allude to a cross. It doesn't have to be so pronounced. How I think of a cantilever is, you know, in Vancouver, because there's so much construction going on, we walk or drive around the city or take the bus and we see all the cranes out there. Mm-hmm. And the basic thing with a crane is exhibiting cantilever composition. So it's secured to the ground and it's standing tall, and then it has an arm, and often there's a load at the end of the arm because the crane is actually used to move things in the construction site. So that's the key with the cantilever, is there's a base, there's an arm, and there's often a load with interpretation. So Sarah's done a lovely job. She's got one here with lines and then one that's very loose. And even if you were to go back to that Olga Campbell painting, I'm kind of seeing that in her painting. Do you see that first painting I did in the copycat exercise? Maybe a bit of cantilever happening. So these are the fundamentals of abstract paintings. Often people that start out abstract painting think that abstract painters just throw paint on the canvas and it all happens. But there's actually quite a bit of intelligence behind abstract painting. Horizontal. So basically what you have here is your landscape composition. And this is a composition to consider if you want a painting that's very tranquil or peaceful. Often a landscape, when you look at a landscape, there's a lot of space, there's a feeling of calm. And so when you're choosing your first C, your composition, that's something to consider. You know, what mood do you want to create? What effect do you want to create? The lovely thing about horizontal is you could go in and you could do some little, like, you know, marks with your straw or scratches or even scribbles, and it still works because it's such a solid foundation. So the horizontal composition is a great composition for play because you build this really nice solid horizontal composition, but then you can sort of add little scratches and removals and glazing and all of that, always coming back to that. Horizontal B is basically the same as horizontal A, but just showing that whenever you're making marks and you're working on a painting, you always have a choice. You can make a mark slowly, you can make it quickly. You can use a line, or you can do it freehand. And so the reason I had Sarah always do two compositions is to show you these comparisons. when you're working on a painting, you may really want to think about incorporating this concept of tight and rigid line to loose and flowing, because then you're getting that nice contrast happening in your paintings, which is exciting. So the next one is overlapping frames.
And you like that because of your quilt.
Okay, I've used this before in the patchwork paper, and your exercise next week will be to use this composition to create a painting using overlapping frames. And in these examples that Sarah's done for us, she's used squares and rectangles that overlap. But I've taught workshops where people just use circles. Now, again, this is a very solid composition. And you can see how some of the squares here she's put sideways and so on. But this composition, because it's got such a strong foundation, it's the only word I can use, this lends itself to putting little fun things in. You know, whether it be a word in there, or a stamp, or little scratch marks. But when you have a very solid composition like the horizontal, then you can really start to play and use all those techniques, but you still stick to that really beautiful base. And curves is this circular organic, and I often think of it as, has anyone here ever looked at blood work up close, microscopically? Okay, no, who would do that? Well, I have. It's really interesting because you see, what about cells in biology? You know, students look at cells, so it's very organic and moving. There's a lot of movement going on here. So something else to consider and to write in your notes is different compositions lend to different contents. Like curves is got sort of a movement, organic aliveness to it, right? Whereas horizontal can be more calming. Okay, next piece is vertical. So I would say both of those pieces look quite calming and tranquil. And basically vertical is very straightforward, and it's a very solid composition, again, that would allow for you to play and branch off. And often people that are using this, things come out of it, like maybe trees, you start to see trees out of it, or you do start to see city buildings come out of these layers of paint in this composition. When I think of meander, I think of Jackson Pollock. He's dripping paint, and it's all over the board. There's no specific focal point, so that's something to consider with this. I often draw an analogy to, say you're on an airplane and you're flying over the prairies, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and you look down and you see a field of wheat, and the wind is blowing, so the wheat sort of blows in different directions. So it's a painting, it's a picture in itself, and it has continuity, and it's a meander composition. So it can be very beautiful, no focal point. Different colors allow you for different colors. This would be a great composition to play for scraping away and like dripping layers of paint on, like Jackson Pollock did. Diagonal is a composition you want to use that gives your painting energy. So when I think of this, I think of that Nike symbol on a shoe, and how it's going up from left to right, and it could go from right to left. Thanks, Jocelyn. But the bottom line is it implies energy. So if you're using this composition for a painting, keep that in mind, that it's going to give your painting essentially movement, energy or movement. This next one is a spiritual composition. Sarah's done some pretty designs. The bottom line is it's a center focal point. That's the key thing to remember. And then it's whatever it means to you. It could be a portrait. It could be a thing like a fish. That could be like have some kind of meaning for you. It's basically something in the center. It could be a mandala, you know, a piece radiating out, or a moon, or like a centerpiece people use on necklaces. A cruciform is an example of a spiritual focus. It's just very specific. So this is open to artist interpretation, but generally when I teach this composition, I say that the key to remember is that it's the center focus. Constellation. So there's a painting in my portfolio. It's called Vermont in a Snowstorm. It's in the Emerging series. If you send me an email with the title, I'll email the picture to you. And it's a great example of a constellation where basically you have lots of dots all over the painting, and you may or may not, if you look very closely in B, you'll see the Big Dipper. You may or may not have a focal area that is like a constellation. But the bottom line is it's more dots as opposed to meander that's a lot looser. So golden section is based on a mathematical formula and very complex. Basically, in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're taking your page and you're dividing it in a third, and then you're dividing that in a third, and you're dividing that in a third, and around and round it goes. And you can see this here, it looks like an ammonite shell. Generally, how I simplify it when I'm teaching is I'll say, divide your painting into 9 pieces, and you don't want people to see the lines, obviously, and think about 4 areas of focus and 1 being the center focus, and that's the simplified golden section. All right, so the last one is uneasy, and this one is what it says it is, and basically what you are aiming to do as an artist with this composition is make the viewer uneasy. So it's not going to fit into any of these basic compositions. It's something you've created that has the viewer look at it and feel uneasy, like it's not right, and that's intentional. So again, this is really up to interpretation. This is how Sarah interpreted it. You may have your own interpretation. Just like the spiritual composition, this one here is your artistic expression. Great, so those are the 12 basic compositions for you to play with. Next week we're starting a new project, so make sure you have some fresh canvas pads. And yes, we'll be working with this one. And otherwise, you've learned a lot. So if you have a chance to practice this week, please do.